All right. Hello, everyone. We're going to resume the Cataloging Queer Library Issues Symposium. Right now, I would like to thank or welcome Mike Oliveira, representing One Archives. Sorry for butchering your name, Mike, but come on.
Hey, good morning, and thank you very much, Taylor, Michelle, and Patrick. Thank you. Carol Raby, Paul Royal, Rhonda Rawson, and everyone at the Hannon Library in LMU. I thank you for providing this opportunity. Oh. Always forget to hit that share button. There we go. Cat was a mentor, a community member, a founder, a professional. He listened and shared his experience and expertise to improve access to information and greater understanding, whether as a cataloger or an activist. In the mid-90s, Cat began volunteering with Jim Kepner's International Gay and Lesbian Archive. He had to convince Jim that he was dedicated and he was willing to work with the community. Kepner didn't trust people from institutions. And he continued with the merged organization of the International Gay and Lesbian Archive and One Incorporated, the publisher of One Magazine, which today is known as One Archives at the USC Libraries. Cat was a regular volunteer on Saturdays and later on Wednesday evenings. Cat would arrive at 1, and within minutes of walking into the archive, he would have a stack of materials on his desk. Catalog books, magazines, and other media, enriching and improving the imported OCLC records that were often deficient. Cat also connected One with LMU's special collections. I believe that is the Cat the archive had, but I'm not positive. I haven't had anybody be able to identify him. So if anybody knows about whose little kitty that is, we'd love to know. Cat worked with the InMagic database at One. We were a nonprofit organization, so didn't have a lot of money. And according to our existing databases, in his 25 years with One Archives, he cataloged more than a fifth of the books, pamphlets, and magazines, creating over 10,000 catalog records, along with many other projects. This number does not capture Cat's full contribution, as thousands of records have been transferred out of our InMagic database and into the USC Catalog Library and Archive space. The book records that were transferred maintain his enriched cataloging. We made sure that happened. Cat served on the board of One and chaired the library committee. He also shared his experience and expertise with researchers and staff. He was an invaluable resource to numerous researchers. Cat's connections community, paved the way for donations of several collections to the archives. Including the records of ACT UP Los Angeles and the papers and photographs of Mark Christopoulos, Chuck Stollard, John Fall, J.T. Anderson, Judy Cisneros, and Ty Geltmacher and James Rosen. After the formation of ACT UP in New York and the second national March on Washington for lesbian and gay rights in 1987, Cat Walker and others returned to Los Angeles to form the third chapter of ACT UP in December 1987. In less than a decade, ACT UP transformed medicine, how doctors share information with patients, how pharmaceutical companies conduct drug trials, how the FDA processes compassionate use requests, and so much more. As one of the founders of ACT UP Los Angeles, Cat provided insight into the movement's actions, methods, and personalities. He was able to connect researchers with former members to enrich the research experience and include first-person accounts in their projects. Cat was a community member. Beyond his work with One Archives, the Homosaurus, the Rainbow Roundtable, and ACT UP LA, he was a member of Queer Nation, the Great Outdoors, the Barnacle Busters, and California Men's Gathering. He was also a regular at Outfest Film Festival screenings with his spouse, Patrick. And in Cat's own words, LGBTQ librarians can accomplish a lot together. We still have more battles to be fought and more progress to make. Sorry, this is so fast. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mike. Okay, now I would like to welcome John C. DeSantis, representing the Rainbow Roundtable, to share.
Thank you, Taylor. And I'd like to thank all of Walt's colleagues who organized this webinar. I'd also like to thank the Rainbow Roundtable for their invitation to participate in this event. I'm going to start sharing my screen now. Okay, I think most of you here knew him as Walt, but many of his friends called him Cat, as did I, but I'm going to call him Walt in this presentation. It's hard to believe that over a year has passed since we all lost Walt, but I'm so happy that this event is taking place to honor his memory today. I hope that my short remarks will do him justice. I'm speaking to you today from Hanover, New Hampshire, which I acknowledge is on Abenaki land. I'm going to talk about Walt's involvement with ALA and in particular the Rainbow Roundtable. But Walt and I were good friends for almost 25 years, and I loved him. So I'm also going to talk about Walt as a person and share my memories of him. So picture it, San Francisco, 1997, the Castro. A group of gay librarians attending the ALA annual conference were attending an event at the Castro Theater and then wandered up the street to have dinner. Walt and I were among them, and that's where we first met. We found out quickly that we had a lot in common. Both of us around the same age, the same height. We both graduated from library school around the same time. Both of us catalogers, as well as film buffs. We also seemed to have the same sardonic sense of humor. We quickly became friends and enjoyed spending time together at subsequent ALA conferences. Here's a picture of us at a GLBT roundtable event in 2015, back in San Francisco again, at the Harvey Milk branch of the San Francisco Public Library. So let's back up a bit, all the way to 1990. This is around the time that Walt was graduating from library school at UCLA and began working as a librarian at the Huntington Library over in San Marino. He also joined ALA and became a member of what was then called the Gay and Lesbian Task Force. I myself began attending meetings of the task force beginning in 1991, but Walt didn't begin coming to ALA conferences until a few years later when he began working at Loyola Marymount. Since I don't think this is going to be addressed elsewhere, I also wanted to talk about Walt's service to the cataloging community within ALA and elsewhere. He served for many years on the ELECT's Catalog Form and Function Committee, which eventually became an interest group. He chaired this group for a while and was also involved with its program planning. More recently, he became involved with OLAC, the online audiovisual catalogers. His biggest contribution through OLAC was serving on CAPC, the Cataloging Policy Committee, a hard-working group that met on Friday evenings during ALA conferences. I myself served on this committee for a couple of years back in the 90s. Walt served on a number of their task forces and also served as chair of this committee. But I want to go back to the Rainbow Roundtable. Walt and I both had a long history with this organization over its various incarnations and name changes. We saw it grow from a task force of the Social Responsibilities Roundtable to becoming the Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, and Transgender Roundtable, its most recent name before the recent change to Rainbow Roundtable. As you can see from this slide, Walt made many important contributions to the Roundtable. In the 80s and 90s, the task force disseminated bibliographies and other resources related to LGBT librarianship through what was called the Clearinghouse. How many of you remember that? ALA members, the general public, and organizations wrote to us to request information and copies of bibliographies. It was a very intensive operation for the task force. Eventually, this activity ceased due to outdated information and lack of volunteers. Walt revived this activity by founding and eventually chairing the Resources Committee, which continued this work for a few years, but is currently not active for reasons not known to me. He also served twice on the Stonewall Book Awards Committee, as did I, although we never overlapped. Walt said in an oral history interview that he did for the Roundtable a couple years ago that this was the most enjoyable part of his association with the Roundtable. I guess I could say the same for myself. Aside from working with the books, there was also the opportunity to attend the breakfasts and brunches at which the awards were presented and meet the winning authors. Walt and I usually sat together at these events. More recently, Walt was elected by the Roundtable membership to the executive board as a director at large, bringing a voice of experience and institutional memory to the table. He was actually still serving in this role at the time of his sudden death. And let's not forget the famous socials, which were held twice a year at both the midwinter meeting and the annual conference. Walt and I looked forward to these events and enjoyed them. Here you can see him chatting at one of the recent socials. And here are a few more pictures from the socials over the years. Walt's sister Michelle, whom you heard from earlier, was a frequent travel companion, as she mentioned, and sometimes accompanied him to ALA conferences. So here we all are at the Rainbow Roundtable Social in Chicago in 2017. And here are a few shots of Walt and me at various Roundtable socials. Walt loved to travel. And aside from the ALA conferences, we also saw each other sometimes in other venues. Here we're having lunch in my neck of the woods in Vermont during a road trip through New England that he took with Michelle. In fact, I think that Michelle took this picture. We also tried to get together at least for a meal whenever I was out in LA. Walt was proud of being a native Angelino and knew the city well and always gave me good advice on restaurants and things to see. Walt loved hot weather, so Los Angeles was the perfect place for him to live and work. We often talked about living in Palm Springs one day when we were both retired. But he also hated cold weather and was known to skip the occasional ALA midwinter meeting if it was being held in a cold, snowy location. He was often teased about that, which I think he enjoyed. Anyway, here I am visiting him in the middle of his workday on the campus of Loyola Marymount. Walt loved going out to movies, film festivals, concerts, performances, and so on, often with his best friend, Tony, whom I got to know through Walt. I'm not sure if Tony is here, but if so, hi there, Tony. I want to end this presentation with this slide. Walt was an outstanding librarian who loved his work, both in the library and beyond. He was also an outstanding person, a trusted colleague to many, a mentor to younger librarians, a warm, funny, and loyal friend, a devoted son and brother, and a loving husband to his partner of many years, Patrick. I saved the best for last, Patrick, and I'm so glad that you and Michelle could be here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. I love all those pictures so much. And now I would like to welcome Amber Billey and KJ Rawson representing the Homosaurus.
I'm just starting to share my screen. Okay. So hi there, I'm KJ Rawson. I'm an associate professor of English and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Northeastern University. I direct the Digital Transgender Archive, and I also co-chair the editorial board for the Homosaurus. And I think Billey's going to introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amber Billey, but I just go by Billey. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the systems and metadata librarian at Bard College. I serve on the Homosaurus editorial board since its beginning, I believe. And I also serve on the oversight board for the Digital Transgender Archive. And it's my pleasure to be talking about Kat's contributions to the Homosaurus today with KJ.
Great. So I'll get us started. I have to say, John, I'm kind of reeling a bit after your presentation. But thank you to Taylor. Thank you to everyone who's already spoken today. And thank you for the organizers for this event. It's just been so beautiful and remarkable. We're really thrilled to be here. And I want to say from the start that Billey and I are here representing a team of 9 folks. And so we're going to do our best to represent the work of the Homosaurus and the project itself, and really try to highlight some of the important contributions that Kat made. We are going to refer to him as Kat because that's how we knew him. In fact, sometimes we would joke and be like, who's this Walter? Making comments in our documents. So anyway, I'm going to begin today by sharing a bit about the Homosaurus, focusing on its mission and its history. Then Billey's going to talk about controlled vocabularies and get into a bit about what the Homosaurus is doing more specifically. And then I'm going to wrap up by reading the tribute that our board wrote, and it has posted on our website to honor Kat's contributions. So with that, I will begin by sharing our mission. And I will read it in case you are feeling a little bit lazy. So the Homosaurus is an international linked data vocabulary of LGBTQ terms that supports improved access to LGBTQ resources within cultural institutions. Designed to serve as a companion to broad subject term vocabularies, the Homosaurus is a robust and cutting-edge vocabulary of LGBTQ specific terminology that enhances the discoverability of LGBTQ resources. It's a lot of acronyms in one mission statement. So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, I'm guessing that most of you are, but I just want to give a quick introduction to what a subject term vocabulary is. But in brief, it is a controlled set of terms that information professionals can use in cultural heritage institutions. So places like libraries, archives, museums, and so forth. And these terms allow researchers to discover materials based on topics. So if you're trying to find out about a particular topic and you don't have a specific author or maybe a title of a text that you want to research, these topics can really help you to find materials related to the subject that you want to learn more about. So the most famous and widely used subject term vocabulary is the Library of Congress subject headings. They've been widely critiqued for many, many reasons. And again, many of you here are well familiar with those reasons. Many of you have leveraged those criticisms yourselves. And one of the longstanding critiques has been the way that LCSH fails to adequately capture queer terminology. So it's within this context that the Homosaurus has come to intervene. So right now we're approaching 2,000 LGBTQ related terms within our vocabulary. And these terms can be used in any cultural heritage context in order to allow users to find materials related to the terms that we have built into the vocabulary. So we really think about the Homosaurus as an activist and interventionist project. Kate McKinney refers to this type of work as information activism, and I think that's a helpful way of thinking about it. So though our work is very much cutting edge, and it's something that we feel as though we're kind of pioneering many things, it has a long and rich history. So the project actually began in the Netherlands in 1982. So at that time, it was a collaboration between two queer archives that were based in Amsterdam. And they developed this vocabulary as an in-house subject term list to describe their materials. So it was designed to be a comprehensive resource. They wouldn't need other vocabularies like LCSH. It was revised quite a few times throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. At one point, I'll mention that Ellen Greenblatt was involved in a revision, since I'm guessing that many of you would be familiar with her work. But it was both a Dutch and English resource throughout this time. And in 2015, I came across it while I was struggling to find terms to describe materials for the Digital Transgender Archive. And so I was really excited to find the Homosaurus and to connect with Jack Vanderval, who was one of the original creators of the Homosaurus. And he was excited to make it a linked data vocabulary in conjunction with the DTA. I don't think we fully knew what we were doing when we did that, but I wanted to be able to use it with the DTA. And so Jack was also excited about improving the vocabulary. And so in 2016, we established an editorial board, and Kat was also one of our earliest members on the board. And I'll talk more specifically about Kat's contributions, as will Billey, as we continue. So we worked feverishly for the first few years, first of all, trying to figure out what we were doing and how we were going to work as a group. But pretty early on, we decided that we could not be a really broad and comprehensive vocabulary. We just weren't going to do a good enough job describing general things. So instead, what we did was we really took a new pathway and decided that we were going to be an exclusively queer vocabulary. And that really allowed us to focus our energies and efforts on describing queer materials rather than just trying to be everything. So it turned into a supplemental vocabulary rather than a standalone vocabulary. And the last thing I'll mention is that just this year, we received a grant to expand and further develop the vocabulary. So the board has been kicking into overdrive and really getting excited about the possibilities for growth and the future directions for the project. So with that, I want to turn it over to Billey to get into some more specifics.
Great. Thanks so much, KJ. So the Homosaurus employs a hierarchical structure, which I'm sure most of us are familiar with, is a standard format used for thesauri. This structure has always presented a rather uneasy format for a queer vocabulary. In a controlled vocabulary context, a hierarchy refers to relationships among terms where terms are broader, others are narrow, while some are related horizontally. Any term can also have a scope note particular to that term. A use for connection might also be made if there are other terms that are synonyms or close equivalents. This architecture provides an important structure because it places terms in relation to one another in meaningful ways. It facilitates movement among concepts and enables collocation of resources. Operating always within such a hierarchy, the information activism that Homosaurus employs falls broadly into what Emily Drabinski has described as corrective and analytic approaches to knowledge organization. In the corrective approach, we provide branches of new interconnected subject terms that are excluded from other dominant vocabularies such as LCSH. Kat worked extensively, I cannot stress it enough, how much work he did, extensively on building out the vocabulary utilizing a corrective approach. And I will talk through several examples of his work. Though even as we embraced and extended this corrective approach, generating more extensive, precise, and accurate community-driven language for labeling queer resources, we were also keenly aware of the limits of this strategy, which reproduces and reifies dominant systems of classification and thereby of power. With the analytic approach, we pose an important challenge to the vocabulary's hierarchical structure, including the relationships among terms. Having these new terms and connections available does not simply allow for more accurate descriptions of the ever-changing configurations and possibilities of queer identities and cultures, though it certainly does that. It also provides epistemological visibility and validation for ways that queers are already creating our worlds. If you could advance the slide. So for my first example, when it comes to adoption, we get from LCSH only the minor and inadequate gay adoption subject heading. Gay here is used to encompass, as the scope note denotes, works on adoption of children by gay men or lesbians. We get nothing about the particularities of adopting as a bisexual, transgender, or otherwise queer identified person or family unit. The headings fail to give us any nuance. In contrast, in the latest version of the Homosaurus, we offer a heading for LGBTQ adoption, and under that term is the narrower term second parent adoption, alongside subjects like LGBTQ adoptive parents. In the next slide. Cat Walker employed the corrective approach when he worked to expand the Homosaurus for spiritual and religious queer identities. LCSH contains oddly connected terms such as Buddhist gays, Catholic gays, Christian gays, Jewish gays, Mormon gays, Muslim gays, neo-pagan gays, and Protestant gays, all under the broader term of gays. The narrow term gay, from gays, the narrow terms gay men and lesbian branch out to more specific religions such as Jewish lesbians and Christian gay men. But alongside those terms, under each of those are middle-aged gay men and rural lesbians. Cat chose to create a hierarchy of religion and spirituality that grouped together these terms by religion, but expanded based on sexuality. So he worked within all of these different individual identities for all these different religions. It was a tremendous amount of work. Next slide, please. We can see this approach continued with Cat's work on intersectional racial and ethnic identity terms within the Homosaurus. Each of the Homosaurus terms on the right are further expanded to encompass the narrower terms for each of the LGBT and Q identities. So again, I cannot tell you how extensive and complicated this very detailed work was. And Cat diligently took this on as a truly talented librarian. And you can see the comparison of how granular and detailed we're able to get representing intersectional queer identities as compared to LCSH. Next slide. With the corrective approach, we can capture nuances of queer culture that currently are not accurately described by LCSH. Personally, as a masculine butch woman, I do not exist in LCSH, except in only within the dynamics of the butch-femme relationship. And I am certainly not a dog. Within the Homosaurus, my identity is accurately described and made visible, and even more nuanced since within our thesaurus, butchness is not only confined to lesbian culture, but is also a role behavior and sexual identity of any gender. So you can also accurately describe the butch queens of ballroom culture as also being butch. And for the final example of a corrective approach, LCSH may have bears, the large furry land mammal, but it doesn't have our kind of bears, the queer large furry land mammal, because the Homosaurus is not restricted to terms created based on literary warrant. It provides an opportunity to describe queer culture and our subcultures far more precisely than any other controlled vocabulary. Next slide. While the previous examples illustrate where the Homosaurus offers corrective opportunities to expand the available lexicon for describing queer resources, an analytic approach reveals that no amount of expansion could ever fully mitigate the logistical and philosophical challenges inherent in a queer controlled vocabulary. An analytic approach leads us to a sweeping critique of the normativization of the impulse of thesaurus structure on several levels. It flattens out the complexity of queer terminologies. It puts terms in static and hierarchical relationships to one another. It exerts normativizing power to privilege certain terms that exclude others, and it instructs others on how terms should be used. For example, the subject term transgender people is a helpful place to begin unpacking implications of the hierarchical structure of the Homosaurus, and by extension, many other controlled vocabularies. This illustration is the full entry for transgender people in the Homosaurus, which includes all potential types of relationships in the hierarchical structure. The narrower terms depicted in this diagram show precisely which terms we include as narrower terms, some of which are uncontroversial, whereas others are quite contentious. Related terms are generally lower stakes because they do not represent part-to-whole relationships, though we have included historically outdated terms that are only intended by the editorial board to be applied in particular contexts, as well as connections to non-trans terms in order to call attention to their status as the invisible cisgender norm. In recognition of the complexity of the term transgender people, we added a scope note that instructs users to add more specific terms when possible, suggesting that the term transgender people can be helpfully supplemented by more specific, narrower terms. Through a combined analytical and corrective approach, the Homosaurus seeks to create terminology that reflects our ever-changing queer community more accurately to describe our resources. And now I'll hand it over back to KJ to wrap up our presentation.
So the board came together last year to write a tribute to Cat, to try to capture some of the ways that we were impacted by his passing, but also the tremendous amount that he contributed to our work. So I'm actually going to read that tribute in full, again, to bring the voices of the board here today. The link is on this slide, so if you'd like to also read along or bookmark it for yourself, it's here. And I also want to mention that we're in the process of putting out several publications about the Homosaurus, and in each one we are honoring Cat in some way. So his legacy is continuing to live on with the project. So here's our tribute. We wrote, Cat Walker joined the editorial board of the Homosaurus in 2016 after he met Jack Vanderval at the LGBTQ OMS conference in London. At this conference, Cat presented a keynote titled Overcoming the Barriers, Improving Access to LGBTQ Content in Collections. Cat's lifelong activism and passion for LGBTQ libraries and archives motivated him to join the editorial board, and he quickly became an active, very active, member of our team. At the next LGBTQ OMS conference in Berlin in 2019, Cat and Jack presented a paper together on the abridged Homosaurus that we had just released. It is difficult to overstate Cat's contributions to the Homosaurus over the 4 years that he worked on the project. As the board dramatically revised the first version of the Homosaurus, Cat played a central role in helping us to make use of many, many more terms in LGBTQ-related contexts, representations, and histories. Cat worked extensively on reconciling Homosaurus version 1 to version 2, which I'll say as an aside was very unglamorous, but really important work. He examined the vocabulary with a close eye and pulled terms that required revision, that lacked consistency across the list, or that had a unique value that could be extended for related searches and needs. This list, which was composed of new suggested terms as well as adaptations of existing ones, was one of Cat's most recent and ambitious contributions to the board's work. At the time of his death, his documentation of related and suggested terms encompassed over 250 changes and/or new terms. This is important work that we continue to work on and are completing in his honor. Above all, Cat was a patient, kind, and gracious teacher and collaborator, and he was always the first to volunteer to take on new projects. Cat's attention to detail, as well as his commitment to making the Homosaurus a truly beautiful and inclusive set of terms, will be impossible to replace. We are endlessly grateful to him as we celebrate all that he contributed to this important project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Billy and KJ. And now I would like to welcome back our past four presenters, Billy, KJ, John DeSantis, and Mike Oliveira for a Q&A session. All right, so everyone, you can go ahead and submit any questions you have to that Q&A. Yeah, go ahead and turn on your video, Mike and John. I'll wait for questions to filter in right now. The chat is having a very lively discussion of
Yes.
the classifications.
Yes,
of
I want
fair and
to
other.
I want to thank Adam for pointing out and for correcting me that LCSH does have a subject heading for bears and gay culture, and it even has a classification number. I looked this last night while I was finishing up my slides, and I swear that it wasn't there. So I stand corrected, and I will remove that. So
I mean, I'm pretty sure Homosaurus did it first. My impression is that generally that is the order of events. It takes Library of Congress quite a while, even if people are not lobbying to keep terms terrible. All right, we have a question. KJ and Billey, can you talk about asexuality in the Homosaurus?
Billey, do you want to take this one? You want me to jump in?
Why don't you go ahead and jump in?
Yeah, actually, and I've seen one of our board members, Bree Watson, chatting in the chat. We've actually added a lot more asexual and asexuality related terms like over the past 6 months or so. So it's definitely been something that we've been hearing some requests for and some feedback about. So if you look at our versioning, you'll see some new terms being added there. But one of the great things about the Homosaurus is that we love suggestions. And so if there's ever an area of the vocabulary where you find things that are lacking or things that need new connections or whatever it is, please just submit those. Submit as many as you'd like. We're happy to take those on and welcome any feedback.
Thank you very much. Since we're talking about classification, can Mike talk about how the One archives are organized and maybe some more about some of the collections there?
Oh, the books are organized. Whoa, got a lot of glare there. Sorry. I've got to remember to move left and not right. But anyway, so they still use Jim Kepner's system of organizing, which is alphabetical by author. And then if it is a biography or autobiography or critical work of a person, then the works are there. And we've had volunteers contribute to the organization and continue to work and help us shelve things. So it makes things interesting. Occasionally, they'll look at a title, they'll look at something. It was just the author escapes me. But there was a well-known author in Los Angeles that wrote something about Oscar Wilde in the title, and it ended up under Wilde. And for a while, we were looking for it, going, where is it? It's like, okay, yeah, it's got to be under Wilde. So occasionally it makes searching through the closed stacks kind of interesting. Collections, yeah, we have over 670, I think, collections up on the Online Archive of California. The archive is open to the public as well. I'll make the announcement here. Starting on August 23rd, will be open. And that is by appointment. So that will be an interesting process also. Yeah, so please feel free. Yeah, I can talk forever. So trying to keep myself brief.
Thank you. We have a question about a follow-up to the ACE question. Just said, including biromantic. I'm just gonna ask Amber and KJ, like, do you know anything about biromantic representation on?
We have been working very hard on expanding our relationship branch of the Homosaurus. And a lot of that work is that Bree and others on the board have been working on. So if you don't see it now, you will be seeing it very soon. KJ, do you have anything else to add about that? Yeah, we are working very hard. We recognize that there are a significant amount of gaps, and we had we're starting to really address some of the missing branches that are missing maybe some leaves and some other, they need some more details, and we're really starting to work together to really build those out. Yeah. So watch, this is an evolving process, and it's amazing to see how much the Homosaurus has developed in just 5 years, right? From where we were in 2016 to where we are now. It's just absolutely incredible to see how our community has evolved and changed and embraced and opened, and to see how that's been reflected in the wider, not just the LGBTQ plus community, but in our greater society at large.
Thank you so much. All right, we have the contact information in the chat. You can directly reach out to Bree Watson, or go to homosaurus.org/contact. Yeah, they're very interested in all your suggestions. The more people who contribute, the better things can be. They are a smaller force, so everybody who wants to give support, please do that. Do you accept new members? Seems like a relevant question.
Sure, thanks for that question. You're welcome to reach out to me. I'm happy to chat with you more about it. In general, we're not trying to really push our expansion of the editorial board. We're at 9, maybe 10 members at the moment. So one of the things, though, that we are working on is how to involve contributions from folks who are not necessarily on the board, right, but who want to help out with the project, because there are so many ways to help out. So that's actually something that is on our next meeting as agenda in 2 weeks. So it is a point of discussion that we're having right now. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Beautiful, thank you. Does the Homosaurus work with archivists who are using the vocabulary directly?
Yes, I'm one of them, although I would say I'm an archivist with a lowercase a. Yeah, so a lot of members of our board have experience in the archives field as opposed to the library side of things. So it's sometimes we find ourselves kind of casting about for catalogers, because that was one of the tremendous things that Cat offered to our board, was his deep experience in cataloging. And so sometimes we would have what we thought was a great idea, and Cat would come along and be like, that's actually not going to work in practice. And be like, oh, okay, that's really great to know. And so, it's something that we're always trying to do, is like make sure that the work that we're doing is not just theoretical work, but it's really practical work, right? That it's supporting the work of information professionals who make use of the Homosaurus. So we do work with archivists. Some of our board members have been doing trainings with various groups. We're in the process of building out materials that would support new users for figuring out how to use and implement the vocabulary. So yeah, it's something that we're putting a lot of time into.
Nice. And have a question for John. Could you discuss a few of the priorities of the Rainbow Roundtable, please?
Possibly I could, but I think that there are people in this webinar who could discuss them better than I could. I've been away from their work for quite a while. I can tell you that one of their long-term priorities back in the 90s, when I was chair of what was then called the Gay and Lesbian Book Awards Committee, it's now the Stonewall Book Awards Committee. The Book Awards have always been a major component of the Roundtable's work, and that has actually expanded into awards for children and young adult. And in addition, they've also created committees for composing lists of specially acknowledged books that came out within a given year. The Rainbow List, and there may be another one. Also other awards that they've established to recognize major contributions in LGBT service within the library community. I'm floundering a little bit here, but that is one of the major ones. The also working on important issues within the organization. There was I know this because I was on ALA Council at the time when they were advocating for gender neutral washrooms during the convention centers at ALA conferences, stuff like that. And I invite any any of the current active members of the executive board of the Rainbow Roundtable to chime in with more information.
All right, thank you. And you answered a question in the chat, John, but to read it out loud, someone said, I was really touched by your presentation, especially about the stories your photos and experience preserves. Does ALA work with the roundtable to preserve these histories of its members and org? And you answered that ALA places its archives at the University of Illinois, and that includes everything submitted by Rainbow Roundtable. There are also oral histories of members with transcripts. I will also add, I was very touched by those pictures. And Mike, your pictures,
Yeah.
baby, Cat Walker in the Silence Equals Death t-shirt. Act Up, just as relevant as ever right now. Do you have, we ended a little bit early. So Mike, is there anything else you felt you didn't have time to say? Because I always want to hear stories about Act Up.
There are a number of stories, and it's sad because Kat would just mention things at work, and you just go on with working and not really documenting all this, hoping that somebody else had already done it. And I know one of the wonderful things about ACT UP was the fact that everything was orchestrated, everything was planned out. So if you had a protest, if you had an event, and someone was going to be arrested, there was someone that was going to be following them and making sure that they were all right, making sure that they got their medication, making sure that the lawyers knew where to get in touch with them. And Kat was in a couple situations which she described to us, he was that person. And some of the events didn't actually happen. I know there was something at the Oscars in which a member charged the stage, and of course they cut to commercial. But it was an attempt, and Kat was that person at the Shrine Auditorium, making sure that that person was not keeping track of that person, let's say. There are several other occasions that he spoke of. It was really an incredible community of people, and how they all came together, and despite their differences and despite all the crisis around them, the people dying, the misery, they were so incredibly resilient. And I've got to say that is the one thing. Kat was just incredibly resilient, incredibly focused. Yeah, just an amazing person. And it's still so unreal. I'm sure on that first Wednesday evening when he doesn't show up. And I loved, Cynthia mentioned how you'd ask a question and then the little eyebrow would go up and you knew you're going to be taken down for throwing something out there that you really probably shouldn't have. And he was always fantastic with just straightforward advice. Excuse me, straightforward there, but direct advice and practical advice.
Daily forward, yes. But yes, as a supervisee, it's super useful when you've got the eyebrow indicator.
Yes.
Beautiful. We have the chat is mostly people saying they love your talks. And also we have a link to that way up there. I'll grab it, but the Homosaurus logo t-shirt, which I think I'm going to be seeing around. Now that logo is fabulous. Name, logo. How long have you had that logo?
We've had the logo since around 2016, but we just opened this shop like 3 days ago or so. And it says it on there, but all the proceeds go to our partners and our collaborators. So what we're doing is we're taking any financial gain from the shop, and we're infusing it back into the project. And anything beyond that, we're actually going to donate to LGBTQ organizations. So we haven't decided exactly where yet, and I've already been overwhelmed to see how many people are buying things, which I think is just wonderful. But I'm glad we had the opportunity to share the link here.
All right. Submitted question. No one in particular. Yes, Mike.
Oh, I should mention something, and I am responsible for this. In Benita Roth's book about ACT UP, there is a mention of Walt, and Benita asked me, did I know anybody named Walt? And I said, well, Cat Walker's is Walt. And so there's a Walt said there was another Walt in ACT UP, and he said something, and Cat, soon after receiving the book, looked at me and said, I didn't say that. And I was like, I'm sorry, it's probably my fault, because it was just one of those side comments, you know, anybody named Walt? And said, oh yeah, no. And I didn't think anything of it. And that ended up in the book. So if you run into something that just is very uncat-like, that was a misattributed to him.
All right. So that question on, have you seen Sarah Schulman's new book on ACT UP in New York? Let the Record Show: A Political History of ACT UP New York, 1987 to 1993. That's the one you're referring to? Oh,
no, I was referring to Benita Roth's History of Los Angeles. Right. Yeah, Schulman's book is fantastic, but that focuses on ACT UP New York.
The rest of the question is there something like this for the California groups? Does anybody know about that, Mike?
Oh, the Benita Roth book, but it is not it's pretty good. Well, I should say it's pretty good. It's amazing, because she spent years doing this history. Sorry if Benita's out there. It was really an amazing work. But there was never the oral history program here in Los Angeles that there was in New York. And I think that is one of the reasons why there hasn't been a need, or hasn't been the resources to go back and look at those things. And then, of course, so many of those people we've lost, and so much of that history is gone.
All right, thank you. And thank you for reiterating things you just said, because I'm not processing them. Yeah, everybody check out Sarah Schulman's book, apparently, and the other that is good but full of a misquote.
Only one.
One misquote, and it's all Mike Oliveira's fault. Not at all the others. But yeah, if you'd like to hear more about that and see Walt misquoted, I love that anecdote. Thank you. All right, looking for other questions. Yes, the recording will be available on the page for all the sections where presenters have consented to that. Ray found a Walt eyebrow emoji for those. All right. So our options now, a huge amount of ACT UP LA material is now in Indiana and the Carter Johnson Library in Evansville. Thank you, Bree. Options now can go early to break if y'all are in pain, but if anyone would like to share another story they didn't have time to share before, I'm gonna go ahead and open that up. No? Okay, I have questions. So KJ and Billey, you're not looking for people to join the board, but besides submitting suggestions to the Homosaurus, how can people support this work?
I'd say the best thing that people could do is using the vocabulary, honestly, because not only is that helping to intervene in information environments and making queer materials more accessible. But you can really, help us out by telling us where the sticky points are, where you need to develop, or what you're making a lot of use of, and maybe we should even add more terminology in those areas. So I'd say first and foremost, just using it, sharing it with others, letting people know it's out there. I think it's really important. Yeah, Christine mentioned buy t-shirts. Yes, I just bought a throw pillow. I was like, I want a Homosaurus throw pillow. So you can do that. But I really think like trying to talk with your colleagues, trying to spread the word about the project, I think is probably the best thing that would go the furthest in continuing to honor the work that's been done so far. But then also bolstering the project into the future.
Thank you. And do you have a preferred method of attribution or credit for the Homosaurus terminology if people use it?
Well, there's a MARC relator code for it. So you can use the MARC, it's a homo-it. So you can use the $2 homo-it. So if anyone who wants to pop that in the chat, that'd be great. That's my favorite MARC code ever. So it's Homosaurus International Thesaurus, but LC decided to give us Homo-it. I'm very happy with that. We are working on other ways of accreditation or crediting us, and then also we're figuring out our sort of Creative Commons copyright right now. We've been reached out by a number of vendors, so library vendors in particular, who want to start using the Homosaurus as a service for their customers. We got a lot of these inquiries, interestingly enough, during June. So it seemed a little bit like rainbow washing or pride washing. And, because these are vendors that have a lot of money and they want to use our vocabulary as a product. So, some vendors were telling us that they are going to provide this as a service, with no additional cost to their customers, but they're still getting customers. And so these are complicated questions that we have to consider. It is an open link data vocabulary, so we can't stop them from doing anything, but we're trying to figure out how we can protect ourselves. And, we were asking very simple questions of like, well, how do you do the data reconciliation? And they were being quite protective of their data normalization intellectual property, which I understand, but we wanted to ensure that the vocabulary wouldn't be used in a disparaging or damaging way. In any, we wouldn't, a silly example, like we wouldn't want bears to be we wouldn't want the Homosaurus term of bears to be put on an inappropriate material or something, like a book actually about natural history. Like that wouldn't make sense. So how can they ensure that the Homosaurus is being used appropriately? And they weren't willing to engage with us. So those conversations sort of stopped. But we can't stop vendors from using it, but we can protect ourselves, hopefully, that people won't take it and try and profit from it. And so those are the conversations that the board is having now, because we are seeing increased usage, which is just absolutely fabulous. That is the goal. We want people to use this, and as people are using it, we are seeing the issues and those bare branches that need more leaves, that need more build outs and things like that. So it's really exciting. And I see Adam Schiff posted too that you can put the URI in the $0. Are we thinking about minting real world object URIs? It's a question that Adam Schiff is asking. So I have a philosophical opinions about real world objects versus authority URIs. At what point are there so many real world object URIs that it ceases to become a real world object, right? But anyway, it just, at this point, we're looking at minting URIs that will be based on alphanumeric characters rather than the label itself. That's in conversation right now. I don't think that we're it's to be open for discussion. I don't know if I necessarily see the technological value of minting real world object URIs, but that's again a philosophical, I believe a philosophical discussion on a technological topic. And then I see more questions. Sorry. Go ahead.
I'm gonna privilege questions that were actually submitted to the Q&A. So anybody who's in the chat, if I lost your question, go ahead and submit it to the Q&A. Have any public libraries begun using the Homosaurus?
I can take that one. The answer is yes, although I have to say it's really hard to track. So that's one of our challenges this year, is seeing if we can do a better job of tracking. Right now, we definitely know of the Rochester Public Library System is using the Homosaurus, the Providence Public Library System. There's a series of libraries in Ohio, the North Olympic Library System, there's a Chicago area consortium that's been using it. So those are the ones that are just kind of off the top of my head. Yeah, it sounds like some other folks are kind of chiming in with examples too. So yeah, and again, we don't know unless people tell us. And so we're hoping to find a way of getting more direct input when people are using the vocabulary.
Nice. And another Homosaurus question. Is there any possibility of relating the CV to classification schemes or making a classification scheme? I understand it's maybe out of scope and not all CVs have to be related to class schemes, but I was curious.
I think at this point that's out of scope. That's a tremendous amount of work to do that. I mean, I think that it would be, I think and you know, this is, I think it would be more of a priority to build those connections to existing controlled vocabularies. So, and that is work that we are doing. But I think linking to classification schemes, that is interesting. So something to consider for work down the road.
Right. So y'all, if we can get the Homosaurus, the kind of funding that Library of Congress has, we're gonna turn this all the way around. Oh yeah, just people saying they use your stuff. And people are saying they can fund one t-shirt at a time. And somebody saying, I wish my library's collection wasn't so specialized so that I could use Homosaurus in my work. Is there any way a specialized library might be able to utilize the Homosaurus?
I mean, I think you might be surprised by some of the connections that you could make, even if it's, you know, just a few terms here and there. There might be backdoors, even when it's not that you're working with a larger significant queer corpus. I think you might find that some of the terminology might enhance your description of your resources. So I would encourage people to just sort of poke around in it and see what connections they might find.
Yeah, I mean, I use it very occasionally with my cataloging here at Bard, and I find that it's incredibly useful. It's not something that I turn to all the time because I'm not cataloging queer material all the time. But when I do, and I find LCSH to be lacking, it can be an amazing resource to provide additional access points for my patrons here.
And I've got another, out of curiosity, do you know how the Providence Public Library is using Homosaurus? I guess someone mentioned that. I am the cataloger for the consortium and they belong to, and we aren't implementing it in the catalog currently.
I would say what I'm going to do is drop my email in the chat, and Miranda, if you want to reach out to me, I can put you in touch with those folks so you can have a more detailed conversation.
Beautiful. And someone says they're hoping to bring up these ideas and your resources at their job because they're trying to improve their subject headings for marginalized people and subjects. Thank you. So yeah, the Homosaurus is one of the best things for getting out of the slow reactive clutches of LCSH for catalogers. There are other things that can be done, like other backdoor things catalogers are using for other areas where the Library of Congress is deficient. Off the top of your head, do you have other recommendations for other ways to get outside of the field of queer, rogue, that's the word I was looking for, rogue cataloging tips? And are there any best practices or recommendations for updating local authority files when changes are made to the Homosaurus?
Oh, those are two big questions. I think that folks will, in the lightning talks later today, would probably be better equipped to address some of these. I can't think of any right off the top of my head. So if there are people who are using other rogue vocabularies, as you so aptly put, please put them in the chat. My brain is fried right now.
Yes.
But as far as your other question, Taylor, what was it?
Oh, so for example, the subject heading illegal aliens.
Oh, keeping it up to date.
Keeping it up to date. Other thing. Oh, keeping it up to date. Yes, sorry.
So keeping things up to date. We do issue releases, and that will have to be something that needs to be reconciled internally. So you can look at, we often will, I think, KJ, do we issue release notes, I think, and that if you are working, yeah, I mean, that's something that I think you would have to handle internally, unfortunately. So.
All right, thank you very much. Sorry, KJ and Amber or Billy, for this extended Q&A being grueling for you. But I see, always love a shout out the work of Archives for Black Lives at wordpress.com. Mike, yes.
There were actually at least one or two presentations at ALA concerning the Homosaurus, and also one at more specialized cataloging. And I believe the University of Kentucky and actually USC is starting to look at using the Homosaurus. And that process began with a Dean's grant that started, last week. So
Nice.
add USC to the list.
Thank you. All right, I'm gonna cut off questions. Does anybody have anything to say in this last minute? No, then thank you so much. We're going to go to break. I really appreciate